That, of course, is from Chicago, the Oscar-winning 2002 film based on the musical that opened on Broadway 40 years ago and was revived in 1996. Chicago's still drawing audiences today, along with such mega hits as Les Miserables, Wicked, and Phantom of the Opera. But it hasn't always been that way.
In the 1970s, interest in live theater hit an all-time low, and Broadway's dilapidated theaters almost turned out the lights for good. The whole story is in a new book, Razzle Dazzle, The Battle for Broadway, published by Simon and Schuster, a division of CBS. The author is New York Post theater columnist Michael Riedel. Michael, good morning.
Good morning. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you as well. The book is so interesting because it follows like a historical narrative, but we also meet the families behind some of the biggest plays. Why did you decide to do this book?
Well, I was interested in the revival of Broadway because if you've been around the city as long as I have, you know that in the 1970s and 80s, this city was going bankrupt. Times Square was dangerous. There was no tourism. Theaters were being torn down. And I was interested in the handful of people, the Schuberts, the Niederlanders, the people who owned those theaters, who felt they needed to revive Broadway. They needed to save Broadway. And in so doing, they also lifted the fortunes of Times Square and ultimately New York City itself, because Broadway is now the #1 tourist attraction in New York City. People from all over the world come to see a Broadway show.
There's a wonderful moment in the book that you describe with a couple of the major theater owners and producers in the city going to then Mayor Koch and what he said to them.
Yes, Koch used to say to the Schuberts, because they were saying, you got to fix Times Square, you got to make it better. And Koch used to say, listen, don't bother me. Where's Broadway going to go? New Jersey? But the point is that New York has something no other city in the world has, and that's the Broadway theater. Yep. And when New York was down and out, Broadway was still here for New York City. And I would argue, as I do in my book, the watershed moment in the history of this city was when Michael Bennett, a young director-choreographer, sat down and interviewed all of his friends who were dancers in Broadway shows. And from those interviews, he created a show called A Chorus Line. Yep. That went on to run 15 years and saved the Schubert organization and helped lift the fortunes of Times Square.
But since you brought that up, let's talk about that. What did that show cost and what did it earn ultimately? Do you know?
The initial capitalization of that show was about $500,000, and it went on to make $400 million. Wow.
But those numbers are very misleading, because in the book you realize how many of these huge productions even don't do well. I mean, the ratio of success to failure is shocking.
Sure, for every hit show on Broadway, there are probably 20 that lose everything. I mean, the biggest loser of all time was Spider-Man Turn Off the Dark, which, you know, people were almost being killed in the show. They lost $100 million. But if you have a winner, if you're Andrew Lloyd Webber, let's say, in 1979, you have this idea, I'll take these kids' poems about cats and make them into a show, and maybe it'll cost us $2 million to put on. The current worldwide gross of Cats is $4.5 billion, with a B, billion dollars.
That's a staggering amount of money. But it costs, I mean, the upfront costs are substantial now to put on a musical, aren't they?
Yes, of course. Of course, with inflation, they've gone up. I mean, the average musical now is $15 to $20 million. So it's gotten more and more expensive. But again, if you have a hit now, and we don't think, back in the 70s, we thought, well, a show would run in New York for a period of time. Now shows run around the world. I mean, Mamma Mia just closed in New York after 14 years, but there's still 20 productions around the world.
Do you think that there's something about the name recognition? Because you look at so many of the shows on Broadway right now, and they were movies, like Lion King, like Aladdin. Is there something to that audiences want something that is spoon-fed? They know exactly what the plot will sort of be.
Certainly that is a trend now, and they want it. Hollywood is discovered that Broadway is a place to make a lot of money. So they take the famous old movies and put them on stage. But as I try to show in my book, the shows that are the big hits are the ones that were completely unexpected. If somebody had said to you, hey, let's take this 1,000-page novel by a French guy and turn it into a musical, you're going to say, oh, I'll put money in that. Well, it turns out to be Les Miserables, or Les Miserables, as you pronounce it.
I know. Not too bad with the French. Yes, it sounds much more dramatic. But you quote a great line from Hal Prince that he said to you once.
Hal Prince, the great Broadway director and producer, once said to me, don't give people what they want. Give them what they couldn't even imagine. And that's when theater's exciting. That's when you go to see The Lion King and you think, I'm going to see a cartoon on stage, as I did the very first performance, and all of a sudden, Julie Taymor's beautiful puppetry comes walking down the aisles, and you're sitting there astonished. And when the hairs stand up on the back of your neck, that's when the theater's fun.
So what do you think is the future right now? Do you think it'll be bigger, more over the top, or do you think it'll be a return to more simple narrative storytelling?
I think, again, the shows that surprise us are the exciting ones. The biggest show on Broadway now is Hamilton. It's a rap musical about Alexander Hamilton. Does this sound commercial to you? No. It has a $40 million advance.
But everyone who sees this loves it.
Love it. I would rather see a Hamilton than some old movie that a Hollywood studio has exhumed from the back catalog and is trying to put on the Broadway stage.
Well, the book again is called Razzle Dazzle. Michael, thank you so much.
A pleasure.